Okay, federal government revenue sources. Where do they get the money to do the things that they do? Um, and we're going to find out that the federal government in DC gets its money from a few main sources and then a bunch of smaller little sources. Okay, the main source, federal government revenue, over the last 50 years, 70 years, 80 years, is the individual income tax. It's money taken out of the paychecks of workers. Not everyone gets money taken out of their paycheck. Some people pay their taxes quarterly. These are usually business owners, like, or rich investors, or these type of people. But for the majority of us, and I'm not one of them. Every time I've gotten paid, in my life, since I was a 15-year-old kid and started working in the summer, it was taken out of my paycheck. And you look at your paycheck. For those of you who have jobs, you've all done this. And you go, oh my gosh, who is these people taking my money away? Well, let's break it down. The large majority of federal income tax comes from federal revenue sources. Where they get their money is from the individual income tax. Also, another big chunk is the payroll tax. That's Social Security. Okay, and we're going to talk more about Social Security today. The only really regressive tax in America, well, unless you consider sales tax regressive, but that's kind of one of these inside baseball kind of like, well, it's regressive because the less you make, the more money, more percentage of your money is spent on goods that you need to survive, and therefore, sales tax is regressive. That's really debatable, okay? And we're going to find out that actually right now, sales tax does not go to DC. Instead, sales tax goes to Sacramento and or to downtown LA, or whatever your state is, right? Some states have no sales tax, but sales tax is not a federal government thing. It's only a state thing. So if we're going to say, well, then yes, payroll tax is the only regressive tax the federal government collects. And in theory, some economists believe that sales tax is regressive as well, but that's a state tax and a local tax. We'll get back to it. So payroll tax is your Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid. Medicare, Medicaid is not regressive. I think it's about 2.5%. Everyone pays the exact same 2.5 pennies out of every dollar you make goes to make sure that in Medicare, Medicaid, that old people and senior citizens over 65, my mom, my dad, my grandpa, and low-income people, Medicaid, can get health insurance, okay? And then borrowing coming in at a big number 3, yeah, the third main source of income that our federal government gets is borrowing from the bank. It's money that I'm going to have to pay back for the rest of my career, that my wife will be paying back for a long time. She's just barely getting started in her new career, and that all of you young people will be paying back for the next, I don't know, you have 40 years of work inside you, 45, you'll be paying back to, until you retire. What, 65? Is that the number nowadays? I don't know. Maybe the next 50 years. Oh my gosh, it's crazy to think. Corporate taxes are actually smaller than the amount of the revenue the government collects from borrowing, but it is also part of the big 4, and then there's a smattering of smaller things underneath. Let's take a look at this chart. This blur is the individual income tax. This is, what is it, 50%? These are payroll taxes. This is your Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, about 35%, corporate tax, 7%, and I don't have borrowing on here. Maybe that's why. Yes, this is the one that includes borrowing, okay? No, this isn't. This is a different year. We don't have borrowing on here as a revenue source. I'm gonna find out though. right? This actually is 2018. This was our revenue. We pulled in $3.5 trillion in taxes, and incredible amount of money. But we borrowed almost $1 trillion to pay our bills that year. Um, so doing some quick math, they don't put it in the chart. We're doing some quick math. You can see that $1 trillion, that's about 30% of our federal revenue comes from borrowing. So now we're going to go back to our chart and we're going to do some math for them since they don't want to do it for us and say, okay, well, if this is half of it comes from income tax, 35% comes from payroll tax, I'm almost going to say, I'll bet you that that's out of the 3.5. Okay. I'm going to tell you that we probably get more money from borrowing to pay our bills than we do from even the payroll taxes, okay? And then corporate taxes is a little small sliver, not very big at all. And then over here, what do we have? We have excise taxes and like customs duties and other, and just like these sin tax, these teeny little sources. You guys, the big sources of tax revenue are individual income tax, borrowing probably coming in at number 2. It shouldn't be that high. Payroll taxes, your Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and corporate taxes is so small, I don't even know if we should count that. Okay. And maybe that's why there's such a push to try and raise corporate taxes. At least our current president keeps talking about the fact that he wants to raise the payroll, he wants to raise corporate taxes. And that's probably because they're paying such a teeny percentage of our current spending or our current revenue. Okay, so let's talk about the one at a time, at least the big 4. And we're going to skip through excise taxes and tariffs and customs and duties, like they charge you when you bring stuff in from all this stuff. We're going to skip it, okay? Because it's such a small source. But the individual income tax is a progressive tax, meaning the more you make, the more you get taxed. And I know there's write-offs and loopholes and there's ways of getting out of paying taxes. We've talked before, capital gains tax is considered an income tax, okay? But it's not progressive because it's only at 15%, 20%. We've talked about Mitt Romney paying 13% of his income in 2012 versus Obama paying 18%, and Romney made 30 million and Obama made 800,000, which is still huge. But it's a progressive tax in general. I believe that the lowest bracket, if you make less than 10,000, you're getting taxed at 10%, or everyone's getting taxed at 10% for their first $10,000. And once you get above 400,000 for an individual, you enter the highest tax bracket, which is 37%, 36% under Trump. He was the last person to change our tax code. We had 37%. Look, here it is. And you can, this is the historical highest marginal tax rate. So it used to be 7. During World War I, it got as high as 73. In the 20s, it was 25%. During the Great Depression, it jumped up to 63 to 70% during the Great Depression. During World War II, the highest marginal tax rate was in the 80s. During the rebuild, during the Eisenhower years, it was in the 90s. Even during the beginning of Kennedy's years, it was in the 90s. It was lowered to the 70s. All the way until Reagan took over, and then Reagan in 82 cut it to 50 and then dropped it to 28%. That was like really unrealistically low. Bush raised it to 31. Clinton raised it to 39.6. They don't want to hit the 40 number. Like, no, it's bad uju, I guess. And then you see George Bush II cut it to 35, and then Obama back up to 39, and then Trump lowered it to 37. So we can look now at the history of the top marginal tax rate, keeping in mind that everyone, the lowest $10,000, all of our first 10,000 is coming in being taxed at 10% today. So that's progressive. That means that the more you make, the higher percentage you're taxed. After you get above, so we all make marginal taxes. We all make 10,000. We all get taxed 10% for our first 10,000. Right? That's what marginal taxes are. And we all get taxed 15% for our next 30,000. And then we all get taxed 25% for our next 50,000. But once you get above 400,000 is when you hit the highest marginal tax rate. And this is the history of the highest marginal tax rate. Now, loopholes, write-offs, Some people suggest that we should cap write-offs. So, oh yeah, you can only write off $100,000 a year, which most people don't write off. That's a lot of money. But if you're ultra rich, maybe you do write off more than that. President Trump capped state and local taxes, which is how much money you pay into your state. You could write off your old federal tax bill. You can't do that anymore above $10,000. So President Trump showed us an example of how to cap deductions, and maybe that's a route to try and make it more fair, so that the top 1% does pay its true highest percentage. Social Security, though, is considered a regressive tax because you only pay Social Security on your first $127,000. Now, I don't make that much, but LeBron does. LeBron probably makes $50 million a year, but he pays the same Social Security as someone who makes $130,000 a year or $127,000 a year. That's a regressive tax. That means that this guy made $50 million. This guy made $127 million, but they're paying the same in Social Security tax. Regressive tax. Medicare and Medicaid are proportional taxes, meaning that they get taxed the exact same. I believe it to be about 2.5%. And then corporate tax is a proportional tax, so all corporations get taxed the same percentage. Trump cut that tax. Biden wants to raise it significantly. We've seen that corporations pay a less percentage than individuals do in their income tax or in their payroll taxes. And the individual income tax and corporate taxes have loopholes that can be used to lower your tax burden. We've said many times that Amazon pays $0 in taxes. Let me just, while I'm here, and I'm not going to be back doing this year. All right, I found all sorts of lists. I don't know what the right is, but let's see some. Fortune 500 is like, or the Fortune magazine is like 55 of the top 500 companies in America pay $0 in taxes. Here's a list that I found. Amazon. This is total income in millions. So when you're talking about 10,000 million, that's $10 billion they made in income. And they paid -1%. They got money back. How? Delta, 5 billion, -4%. Chevron, 4 billion, -4%. Look at Duke Energy, 3 billion. They got -21% tax. They got, how much money did they get back? 21% of their income? What is that? Some quick math. $600 million back. But they made, how do they, what? This is the kind of thing that make people say that there's got to be a way to get rid of some of these tax loopholes, okay? The individual and corporate taxes, people can find ways to get out of paying their taxes. And one of the arguments is that, like, look, you guys have lobbyists who are here working over Congress members to try and get these tax breaks. I don't have a lobbyist. There's no one down there worried about Mike Marina, okay? Or you, probably, if you're one of my students. Unless your parents are incredibly rich. If so, God bless. Okay. Some people would suggest there should be a 10% tax floor. So you gotta at least pay 10% of your taxes. Amazon, all these other incredibly rich companies that are just sitting around making billions of dollars a year and paying zero, getting money back in federal taxes, getting money. Amazon got 129 million back, but they made 10 billion. You know, or maybe not. You know, maybe that's fair. What do I know? Maybe they're taking those profits and they're creating high-paying jobs so people can support their family if you work for Amazon, and not have to be on welfare and have the taxpayers support you. Social Security and Medicare do not have ways to write it off, so you're just paying that money no matter what. All of these are modern tax issues, okay? And they're not, there's no answer there's no right or wrong answer as to how what's fair taxes. It depends on what you think, right? And then what you should do is vote for the person who believes what you think. But either way that we look at it, these are where our federal government gets money. Individual income tax, number 1. Borrowing, number 2. Payroll taxes, number 3. Both individual income taxes and payroll taxes come from your paycheck. Corporate taxes is much lower, number 4, and then drop off to like excise taxes, all sorts of duties and tariffs and stuff like that. Next, we're going to find out where they spend it.